Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Live at 10, I'm Chloe Culpen. Prince Charles's former aide steps down from a royal charity accused of helping a Saudi businessman receive an honour. The Taliban breaks up women's rights protests in Afghanistan. And just hours before the Paralympics closing ceremony, Team GB bring home 2 more bronze medals. A former aide to Prince Charles has stepped down from his role at a royal charity following claims he offered to help secure an honour for a rich Saudi donor. Michael Fawcett, a former valet to the Prince, has temporarily left his job as chief executive of the Prince's Foundation. The Sunday Times reports he coordinated support for a CBE to be given to the businessman in 2016 after royal charities received £1.5 million from him. The Prince's Foundation says Mr Fawcett supports and will assist in its investigation. Plans to overhaul England's social care system could be unveiled as early as this week as the government holds talks on the issues over the weekend. The current system is under pressure with past governments failing to properly fund or reform it, but a shake-up would cost billions. It's reported the Prime Minister is facing pressure from his own MPs not to increase national insurance to pay for it, as that would break a manifesto pledge. The Vaccines Minister, Nadhim Zahawi, says the government is absolutely committed to fixing social care. The Taliban has broken up women's rights protests in Kabul. Social media footage shows guns being fired into the air to disperse crowds. Witnesses say tear gas and tasers were also used at the protest yesterday. Women marched through the Afghan capital for the second day in a row, demanding their freedoms are guaranteed under the new Islamist regime. This is the dramatic moment a plane crashed into Poole Harbour during the Bournemouth Air Festival yesterday. 2 people who were on board were rescued from the sea and treated for minor injuries. After initially suspending flights, the festival will continue today. British tennis star Emma Raducanu has advanced to the last 16 of the US Open. The 16-year-old beat her opponent in straight sets to move to the second week of the competition.
From my own perspective, I think I'm playing better tennis here than at Wimbledon. And of course, being on the hard courts, they're less forgiving than grass. But honestly, I think with the amount of matches I've played and the experience that I've accumulated in the last 4 or 5 weeks, my game is just getting better with each match.
Paralympics closing ceremony will begin in the next few hours with gold medalist David Smith carrying the flag for GB athletes. It marks the end of a hugely successful Games for British competitors, claiming 124 medals, finishing second in the table behind China. The men's wheelchair basketball team beat Spain to win bronze on the final day. Quick look at the weather. Most areas will be warm and dry with some sunny spells. That is your live news on Talk Radio TV. Much more in half an hour.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
A very good morning. It is just after 10 o'clock. It is Sunday, the 5th of September, and you're listening to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. Now, can someone help me, please? What's happened to that yellow thing that used to be in the sky in August, in September? I think I recall it was called the sun. It's certainly not here over London. Give us a call if you can see it or when you last saw it. We have got a huge show ahead of us over the next 3 hours. It's been a very big week just gone and a big week ahead. And I just want you to listen to this clip of our Prime Minister and the First Minister of Scotland and our Vaccines Minister to set the tone. Have a listen.
I would just urge all families thinking about this across the country to listen to the JCVI. They are extremely expert. They're amongst the best, if not the best, in the world. They know what's safe, and I think we should listen to them and take our lead from them.
In the lifetime of the Scottish Parliament, a government has never departed from the recommendations of the JCVI on questions of vaccination and immunisation. So if at any point I, as First Minister of the Scottish Government, generally was to do that, that would be a significant step.
The Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation will look at this because vaccines need to be safe for children. I think the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation have to consider all these things. Right. I will absolutely follow their recommendation.
Well, there you have it. The Vaccines Minister says he will absolutely follow their recommendation until this week. Yes, because they've had the advice from the JCVI, and this is our big debate. Should the ministers abandon their own science? And should children be vaccinated even if the JCVI say no? That is the big debate coming up. We've got my Sunday spotlight in the second hour of the show on the Chinese billionaire that's making over £1 billion a year from our public utilities. I'll be talking about that in the second hour. We'll be talking vaccine passports, Nightingale hospitals, immigration, and I want your thoughts, your views. Do go on to the Twitter poll. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Text us to talk at 87222. Tweet at Talk Radio. Or watch us on TV. Yes, we're a TV station as well as a radio station on the app Talk Radio TV or on Apple TV, Samsung, Roku, YouTube and Rakuten. Don't hold back. You're listening to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB and on your smart speaker. This is Talk Radio.
Well, we've got some amazing guests to help discuss the big issues of the day. To inform us all, we've got an MP, we've got former MP, we've got doctors. We really have got some fantastic experts. And the big debate in the first hour is this decision about whether or not to vaccinate 12 to 15-year-olds. Now, it's not often I give credit to government quangos. I'm normally quite critical of civil servants and things, but credit where credit is due. Because yes, the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, they stepped up to the plate. They made their decision, they made their ruling, and they said that actually they cannot recommend that children from 12 to 15 years old, healthy children of that age, should be vaccinated based on the data that they have seen. And I applaud them. I congratulate them. I won't sing congratulations because that would break your radio. But all credit to them, absolutely fantastic. They resisted huge political pressure. They courageously ignored the establishment pressure, including from major newspapers and their editorials. And we've been hearing, haven't we, for 18 months that we should follow the science. Well, the government's own scientists appointed on this particular issue have spoken. And according to our Prime Minister, they're the best in the world. So the very idea that the Prime Minister and other ministers should even contemplate overruling their advice, I find extraordinary. Quite extraordinary. And let's just remember the qualifications of our Prime Minister. He's a journalist. Our Health Secretary was a former banker. And our Vaccines Minister was a pollster. And they think they may know better than the experts they appointed to the JCVI. It is accepted, I think by almost all, that children of that age group, 12 to 15 years old, are most unlikely to suffer from the virus. Never before have we asked children to protect the adults. And there is no evidence that I've seen that there's any more transmission in that age group. I find it quite extraordinary. It is probably the most significant decision of all the difficult decisions that have been taken, that have been made through the whole of this COVID crisis. It's way bigger than lockdowns, tiers, travel rules, testing, way bigger than any of that. It's the most emotive. It's the most important decision. It's also, let's be clear, potentially the most divisive decision between people, between families, between communities, between institutions. And that's why it is so important. And I genuinely fear, that if the government overturn the advice of the JCVI on this, I think the protests will grow. I really fear that they may turn ugly. And we've seen some horrific, utterly appalling scenes just recently that I completely condemn. I do fear the consequences on our confidence, on our society. This is a moment for real leadership. This is a moment not to create division, but to create healing, to bring people together. There is a better way. I really do believe that. And sure enough, we've even got, as we speak, the phones are ringing. We've got a caller, Daniel, in Surrey. Daniel, a very good morning. You're hot on the phones this morning. What have you got to say to me about jabbing children, Daniel?
Well, they certainly won't be jabbing my children, I can tell you that now. And I would take to arms with millions of others and just take over Parliament or Downing Street or both, because there's not enough police in the UK to stop enough people.
Well, let's be clear, Daniel. I completely understand your concern about not vaccinating your children, but obviously no one's condoning any form of violence. The right to protest lawfully, peacefully, is should always be defended. But we don't want anybody taking arms. Thank you very much.
No. What I meant, Richard, was not in a kind of a violent sense, but I think if there was enough people, which I think there probably would be in this occasion, you could quite conceivably, just with sheer numbers, just take over Parliament and Downing Street. Wouldn't need. There'd be so millions and millions of people, because this is an issue that people would fight for. I'm telling you, and do you know what? It's just the level of government we currently have as well.
Yeah.
Everyone I know out there, we need the right. Richard, let me finish. We need a right of centre party to vote for, because this current government that they're in, they're not doing any of the things we asked them to do. We asked them the economy. We wanted the economy back. We want immigration and our border sorted out. We want law and order in our towns and cities, and we've got none of that.
Well, Daniel, there's a political party that you may have heard of called Reform UK that may be just up your street. But I've got Charlotte in Berkshire just before we go to the break. Good morning, Charlotte.
Good morning.
Hi there. What did you want to say about vaccinating children?
Well, I just think it's absolutely totally disgusting that the government has said it's all about facts, data and science all the way through this. But if those facts and data don't actually align to what they want, they're quite happy to go against it.
I mean, you're so right, Shai. It is extraordinary. And you heard the previous caller. Look, I respect the right. And let's be clear, there are millions of parents out there who do want to vaccinate their children. And I think that right should be respected. But equally, the right of the many millions of parents who don't want to vaccinate their children should also be respected. And it is so divisive at a time when actually we need to bring people back together, to have the confidence to live with this virus and to move forward. Well, we've had two views from Daniel and Charlotte. Straight up, this is a big issue. It's an emotive issue, as I said. So we're going to go straight after the break. We're going to be listening and talking to Miriam Cates, MP, about her views on vaccinating children. But for now, the time is just after 10:13. You're listening to Tice Talk. It's going to be a spicy morning. It is, of course, the one and only home of common sense. It's Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. It's 10:16 and the tweets are coming in. We've already had a couple of callers. Don't forget to give us a call, 0344 499 1000. We're talking children. We're talking whether or not they should be vaccinated. A tweet in here from Philip who says, the ministers have been doing whatever they like under the guise of following the science. Remember those words? He then goes on to say, until it doesn't suit them, like now, with vaccinating children. That's Philip from Bournemouth. And let's just remind ourselves what our esteemed Prime Minister, First Minister of Scotland and Vaccines Minister what they really did say. Here they are.
I would just urge all families thinking about this across the country to listen to the JCVI. They are extremely expert. They're amongst the best, if not the best, in the world. They know what's safe, and I think we should listen to them and take our lead from them.
In the lifetime of the Scottish Parliament, a government has never departed from the recommendations of the JCVI on questions of vaccination and immunisation. So if at any point I, as First Minister, the Scottish Government generally was to do that, that would be a significant step.
The Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation will look at this because vaccines need to be safe for children. I think the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation have to consider all these things. Right. I will absolutely follow their recommendation.
Well, there we are. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom says that the JCVI are probably the best in the world. The Vaccines Minister, Nadhim Zahawi, he said he'll be following their recommendation. They've made their recommendation. So why are we still discussing this? All of a sudden, it seems they may not follow their own science. Well, I'm delighted to discuss this. We've got a Conservative MP, the Conservative MP for Penistone and Stockbridge, Miriam Cates, on the line, on Zoom, to discuss this issue. A very good morning to you, Miriam. Thank you for joining my show, Tice Talk. And Miriam, why are we still talking about this? I mean, the JCVI have given their advice and the Prime Minister says they're the best in the world.
Well, yes, I am very concerned about this because for all other cohorts, the JCVI have given their recommendation and the government has accepted that on the basis that the JCVI are following the science. They have the best data. And each time they've made their recommendation based on what's best for that individual cohort, what the benefits to them rather than the wider society. So I am concerned that when it comes to children, instead of accepting the recommendation, which is that we shouldn't push ahead with mass vaccination of children at this point, that we're going to refer it to Chris Whitty and ask him to make the decision based on wider benefits. And what's particularly worrying about that is that the wider benefits that the government refers to are educational disruption. Now, in my opinion, educational disruption is a political choice.
Exactly. It's a political choice.
It's not a scientific inevitability following higher case rates or depending on vaccination rates. So I feel very strongly that Chris Whitty, and I really feel for him having to make this recommendation, I feel strongly he should be making that recommendation on the basis of the medical benefit to children, on not any potential policies, political decisions that the government may make.
Well, and let's remember, his title, of course, is Chief Medical Officer. He's not the Secretary of State for Education. Do you think, Miriam, that the Secretary of State for Education, Gavin Williamson, will have the courage to follow the JCVI advice, or do you think he's under huge political pressure from his cabinet colleagues?
Well, I'm not sure if it is his decision. I think the next step is for Chris Whitty to report back. I'm not sure what happens at that point. But it seems clear to me that if the JCVI recommendation is not going to be followed, it's no longer a scientific question, it is a political one, and therefore it should absolutely be debated in the House, and the decision should potentially be made by Parliament, because we're talking about wider benefits to society, and we need to be honest about that. But let's be clear, these are very finely balanced arguments here. The risks of vaccination are tiny, and so in the adult population, it has made brilliant sense to pursue the vaccination programme. It's made a huge difference in terms of serious illness and death. But in children, because the risks of COVID are so low,
that's right.
These are such finely balanced arguments. And whilst the known risks of the vaccine are very small, the JCVI has commented that the potential risks, the unknown risks, which for children, because they're at the beginning of their lives, could affect them for a lifetime, are too uncertain.
That's the point. You're quite right, Miriam. So I'm just going to read from the JCVI advice, because it really is so critical that people. What they said is, whilst the benefits from vaccination are marginally greater than the potential known harms, they acknowledge there is considerable uncertainty regarding the magnitude of the potential harms. So, as you say, it's the potential unknown harms that may emerge. I'm with you on this, Miriam. I mean, I feel for Chris Whitty. I think that he's being placed in a completely invidious position. But let me ask this, and it's an interesting point you make about debating it in the Commons, because as I understand at the moment, and help me if I'm wrong here, at the moment it's essentially not allowed for doctors to give the vaccine to healthy 12 to 15-year-olds. Is there and I'm a great believer, Miriam, we've got to heal the country. We've got to bring people together. I really think we've got to avoid creating more division. Is there a middle way here where you could have a situation where the JCVI recommendation, they say it's finely balanced, but on balance, they cannot recommend it. But equally, to the millions of parents who have looked at the information and who do want to vaccinate their children, could you make it legal and lawful for them to choose to do so without making it a recommendation? Is that a middle way that may help?
There is a potential in that, and that should be for Parliament to debate, because it would be a departure from current medical practice, which is only to give a medication, a vaccine, if it's clearly in the person's best interest. So hopefully we'll get the chance to debate that. But I think the middle way is to wait. There's no rush. Children are not at risk from COVID. So the JCVI statement said that if we vaccinated 1 million children with this vaccine, we could potentially save 2.5 ICU admissions, but we could cause between 12 and 34 cases of myocarditis. But in the coming months, more and more evidence will become available. The trials will become further down the line. More children around the world will have been vaccinated. Why not wait? For the sake of our children's future, why not wait? We've achieved phenomenal things with our vaccination programme. We've brought the death rate down so significantly that now even in August, flu was responsible for more deaths than COVID. And whilst every death is a sadness, we're now in the position that we can afford to wait before making this decision for our children. And I think that's the middle way.
No, I understand, and I think there's a lot of sense in that as well, Miriam. I mean, I guess the question is, in a sense, I mean, there is an increasing risk of a huge loss of trust in our government, in the words of the Prime Minister and the Vaccine Minister, if they go against their own words, their own advice over previous months, in the last 9 months. I mean, this is, I think, such a seismic issue over the most emotive thing, which is our children.
You're absolutely right, and that is why I'm speaking up on this as a mother. Because I've watched my children, as millions of parents around the country. Unfortunately, I think throughout this pandemic, our children have often been an afterthought. And they've heard things that they should never have heard about them being a risk to their loved ones and things like that. Our children shouldn't be brought up in a climate of fear and believing that they are somehow a risk to those they love. And I think thinking about our children and their attitude to authority, this is an absolutely crucial decision, because we need to show our children that they come first, that their welfare is first, they are our future, and that we won't take any unnecessary risks with their health, particularly after they've paid such a high price with their freedom and education over the last 18 months.
They really have, Miriam. You're so right. They have paid, in a sense, the highest price, and potentially, if the ministers overrule the JCVI, they will be being asked to pay yet another huge price. And I really do worry about the division, the angst, the fury, the problems that it will cause at a time when we need to heal and learn to live with this. Miriam Cates, MP for Penistone and Stockbridge, thank you so much for your thoughts, and I know that you'll be taking those to the Prime Minister, I'm sure, with equal vigour. Thank you for that. And we have got another caller, Gareth in Matlock. Before we go to the bottom of the hour, Gareth, good morning to you.
Good morning. Good morning.
Hi there. What do you want to say about, I assume, about the vaccinating children?
Yeah, well, I've just been listening to Miriam, and I couldn't echo where.
Twitter, terrifying.
Day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
For the benefit of basic society or adults. And I think, I'm a father of 2 teenage
months saying they're following the science. If they had said, we're going to listen to a range of different scientific views and we, the elected politicians, will make our decision and let the people know, that's a different thing, isn't it? But they've spent 18 months saying they're following the science.
Make another point about this. I think you did touch on it, that, you know, this concept that if the government does put forward the idea that 12 to 15-year-olds can have the vaccine if they choose to have it, that is completely divisive, because you're going to have schools full of 12 to 15-year-olds and parents, some choosing not to vaccinate the children and some choosing to do it. And that will create really an unworkable situation for headmasters and teachers. I just, because, you know, there's going to be some divisive situations.
Oh, completely. And that, Gareth, is so unfair on teachers as well. You know, that they're not medics, and we need them, you know, to get children to catch up on the education that they've missed, you know, to get them back learning and to prepare them hopefully for exams again. Gareth, thank you so much for your thoughts. We've got some tweets coming in. Why does nobody actually, this is no name, it's just an anonymous number. Why does nobody challenge the Prime Minister on air and play back his own quote to him? Well, I hope maybe that Miriam Cates or someone else will do exactly that. Another one here saying, Miriam is right, children are going to be traumatised all over this. Another one from Jacqueline says, the government are bullying people to get a vaccine. You know, I think there's some pretty strong views on this. Another tweet coming in talking about why aren't we talking about the triple lock? Well, we'll come back to that as and when the government makes a decision. But at the moment, we are talking about whether or not the government ministers will follow the science or not. We're coming to the just towards 10:30. You're listening to Tice Talk. It's time for the news here at Talk Radio.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Here are your headlines. I'm Chloe Culpin. Prince Charles's former aide steps down from a royal charity accused of helping a Saudi businessman receive an honour. And just hours before the Paralympics closing ceremony, Team GB bring home 2 more medals. A former aide to Prince Charles has stepped down from his role at a royal charity following claims he offered to help secure an honour for a rich Saudi donor. Michael Fawcett, a former valet to the Prince, has temporarily left his job as chief executive of the Prince's Foundation. The Sunday Times reports he coordinated support for a CBE to be given to the businessman in 2016 after royal charities received £1.5 million from him. The Prince's Foundation says Mr Fawcett will assist in the investigation. Plans to overhaul England's social care system could be unveiled as early as this week, as the government holds talks on the issue this weekend. The current system is under pressure, with past governments failing to properly fund or reform it, but a shake-up would cost billions. It's reported the Prime Minister is facing pressure from his own MPs not to increase national insurance to pay for it. Vaccines Minister Nadhim Zahawi says the government is absolutely committed to fixing social care. The Taliban has broken up women's rights protests in Kabul. Social media footage shows guns being fired into the air to disperse crowds. Witnesses say tear gas and tasers were also used at the protest yesterday. Women are demanding their freedoms are guaranteed under the new Islamist regime. The Paralympics closing ceremony will begin in the next few hours with medalist David Smith carrying the flag for GB athletes. It marks the end of a hugely successful Games for British competitors, with 124 medals, finishing second in the table behind China. The men's wheelchair basketball team beat Spain to win bronze on the final day. That's your news on Talk Radio TV. Much more in half an hour.
Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. It's 10:33 and we've been talking for the first half hour of my show about whether or not children should be vaccinated following the JCVI's advice. And I just have to play this clip one more time, listening to the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
I would just urge all families thinking about this across the country to listen to the JCVI. They are extremely expert. They're amongst the best, if not the best, in the world. They know what's safe, and I think we should listen to them and take our lead from them.
In the lifetime of the Scottish Parliament, a government has never departed from the recommendations of the JCVI on questions of vaccination and immunisation. So if at any point I, as First Minister, the Scottish Government generally was to do that, that would be a significant step.
The Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation will look at this because vaccines need to be safe for children. I think the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation have to consider all these things. Right. I will absolutely follow their recommendation.
Well, we live in a democracy. You've heard it from the Prime Minister and the Vaccines Minister, but there are always two sides to a debate, and here on Talk Radio, it's important to have some balance and to listen to the alternative point of view. And that's why I'm delighted to be joined now by Dr. Parat Pankania, who is the Senior Clinical Lecturer at the University of Exeter Medical School. Barrett, a very good morning to you.
Morning.
Why shouldn't we listen to the Prime Minister, who says that the JCVI are the best in the world?
I think the Prime Minister has got form on getting things wrong throughout this pandemic, and both of us know about it. I was just thinking about how I would reply to you as you were playing those clips, and I came through this analogy in my mind, which is, if you were building a motor car and you were just exclusively focused on just the engine, which is what the JCVI has done, you have not focused on the other things that make the motor car better. So what I'm trying to say is, whilst the JCVI has pondered and deliberated and came up with the answer, which was, by the way, it is marginally beneficial. However, what they didn't look at is what are the benefits apart from just immunizing the children. And the benefits are several, which is less disruption in schools, less disruption in the community, suppression of infection, looking at long COVID, which is a big elephant in the room they should have looked at. Putting all those things together, the work of the JCVI has been very narrowly focused, and even with that narrow focus, they came up with it is marginally beneficial.
Barrett, I think it's a really interesting analogy you use there about the motor car. But of course, the engine is the most important part of the motor car. Without the engine, the car's not going anywhere. And I think we had the MP Miriam Cates on just before the bottom of the hour. And her point of view, which actually is reiterated in the JCVI advice, is that, in a sense, why make a decision now? Why not wait for much more data to come through? Because equally, yes, the JCVI said that there's marginally greater benefits about the potential known harms, but their real concern, I think, is the magnitude of the potential harms that we don't yet know about, and therefore surely we should wait. So why rush it, Barrett?
We must lance this boil about harm. I need to say it because I know time is short, that there is greater harm from getting an actual COVID infection compared to theoretical harm from immunizing. We must get that absolutely clear. The vaccines are safe. Our own MHRA have passed them as safe. The United States, Canada, European Union are all immunizing the children, and they are not banana republics. They have got eminent scientists. Now, on the car analogy, you can make a F111 plus engine, but if your gearbox and your axles and your other things are not working, it's not going. Therefore, to take that, prevention is better. When you have a child, when you have any child who is ill and ends up in a GP practice or a hospital or needing support, that is very, very expensive to the healthcare system. Furthermore, the vaccine protects, it prevents. Why shouldn't you do it as soon as possible?
Well, okay, so hear me out here, because I hope you'll accept that obviously, as I've said earlier, there are millions of parents who do want to vaccinate their 12 to 15-year-old, but equally, Barrett, you know, there are millions of people for whom it's an incredibly emotive issue who don't want to. What about the middle way where you make it legal if those parents who do want to vaccinate their 12 to 15-year-olds, they legally can do so of healthy children, but you don't make it a recommendation, and therefore essentially you get the best of both worlds, and therefore you start to heal the process, not create more division. That's what I'm really concerned about.
Easy, Richard, absolutely easy. I have been in this business for 30 years of immunizing, and I have never coerced a parent to take the vaccine. I've been through the MMR, the issues. So what would I do? Inform, advise, educate, take parents with me if they wish to come along with me. I would never force, and I'm never in the business of forcing. At least allow people who freely wish to be immunized to do so, and then the others can be informed, educated, and advised. No problem with that.
So I think you're actually agreeing with me on that maybe that's a middle way, but what we can't have is parents who don't want their children to be vaccinated. We can't have them being morally coerced or morally bullied.
We would never do that.
Yeah,
I would never do that.
I think it feels like we're on the same page on that, Barrett, and I'm really grateful for your time. Thank you very much this Sunday morning. That was Bharat Pankhania, the Senior Clinical Lecturer at the University of Exeter Medical School. So there you have it. Two strongly, differently held views, but actually I think there is a sort of middle ground, and I really do think that we have to find the middle way on this. You're listening to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. It's 10:43. Now, of course, I did invite the Health Secretary onto the show to talk about the JCVI advice, but he declined. Funny that. He went on some other channel with some bloke called Mar and chatted Nadeem Zahawi, talked with them. But again, he refused my invitation. But we have got a caller, John, on the line to tell us his thoughts about vaccinating 12 to 15-year-olds. John, are you there? Good morning.
Yes. Good morning, Richard.
What are your thoughts? Tell us.
Are the government secretly trying to vaccinate the children of our ethnic groups? If you have a proper family, of which you and all your presenters say, we've got to remember that some families don't exist as a family. Now, if you take a husband and wife with 8 children, the parents haven't been vaccinated, so in a household, especially in Tower Hamlets, sort of that area, you have a household where the virus can spread so rapidly because of. I understand that the ethnic groups do have their religions, so if you have a
look, John. I mean, it's an interesting question, which is, different families. I don't think that in any way it's the government making choices about majority groups, ethnic groups, minority groups whatsoever. I just think that the JCVI, they've given their advice and the ministers don't like it, full stop. And I think that we've got a situation where, in a sense, they had assumed that the JCVI would listen to their pressure to vaccinate all children. I don't think it's got anything to do with any particular groups. But John, thank you for your thoughts. Now, we're going to move on from vaccinating children to the other really contentious issue, that of vaccine passports, because throughout the whole year, really, it seems to have been vaccine passports have been on, they've been off. Originally, we were told by the ministers themselves, the likes of Nadeem Zahawi, that they weren't going to have vaccine passports. But it seems that they're now back on the agenda, even though the likes of Michael Gove was very happy to be dancing in a nightclub in Aberdeen just last weekend. Whatever you thought of his dancing, he clearly didn't think the vaccine passports were necessary. Well, I'm delighted that we're joined now here in the studio by Alan Miller, who is the campaigner for Open for All and signatory of the Together Declaration, to talk about vaccine passports and why the government still seems to be pushing on with this idea. Alan, very good morning. Thanks for joining us in the studio. So tell us about your Together campaign, what it's trying to do, and what are the chances of success?
Well, the Together Declaration basically says that vaccine passports are unnecessary, they're illogical, they're unscientific, and we just don't want them. They're un-British. We want to be together with our friends, our family when we go out, and we should not have a checkpoint society. We should not have security guards asking to see the most intimate of our private details. And so what this is, so far we've got over 80,000 signatories just after the first week. We're looking to get many more. We want to deliver the message to the government that the public are very unhappy about this, as well as, you mentioned Open for All. There's over 1,000 signatories of that, and that's people in hospitality, some of the smallest and biggest. But the Together Declaration, and I'd encourage your viewers and listeners to sign it if they agree, says that, vaccine passports, this is regardless. I happen to be vaccinated. Many are vaccinated, many are unvaccinated. It's got nothing to do with that. It's absolutely to do with the idea that why should you have to show me your health papers to participate in society normally? That was never a discussion, and it shouldn't be an exchange that we have to do at this point, in particularly given where we've got to now.
And Alan, to what extent do you think this is the thin end of the wedge, and how do you respond to those who might say on the other side of the argument, well, what are you concerned about? I mean, it's a way of giving people confidence. Many people are happy to carry a vaccine passport. Of course, you can trust these nice people in the government with your data. They'll never misuse it. They'll never lose it. What's the problem? Why are you worried?
Well, there's a number of issues. First, just on the logistical issues, over 700,000 mistakes have already been made on the NHS app and has had an impact on people that are using it. I'm very concerned on the thin part of the wedge, thin edge. Yeah. With that component, because we know that when you start giving away your freedom and your liberties, that doesn't stop at one place. So, you know, because the logical question would be, well, why do you need them just in a nightclub and a festival? What happens when you go in mass public transport or in retail and elsewhere? And all of a sudden, there's some places we see that they have social credit systems. You get tagged for where you go, how you behave, and all of that. This is utter contempt for the public. You know, personal responsibility, a sense of clarity. The majority of the British public have had vaccinations now. The scientific point is actually important as well, because we now know and see that you can transmit the virus if you've actually had a vaccination. It does lessen the damage, and particularly for elderly and vulnerable groups is important. But you can transmit it still. Often people that have not had the vaccination, younger people who might be going to nightclubs and elsewhere, have higher immunity. They may not transmit it. It's illogical. It's almost like a Beckett play where all these mad things are being presented to us. And we want to say to the government, please stop. Stand down. This is a really important issue. We did not ask for our country to be transformed. Everyone put in a lot of hard work, compromise, lots of sacrifices, really strong British response.
And quite rightly. And so, Alan, as you mentioned, in a sense, yes, if you've been vaccinated, it'll reduce the likelihood of the severity of the disease, which is great. But as you say, it doesn't stop transmission. It may reduce it. That seems to be the evidence. And of course, it doesn't stop you being infected with the virus. So if it doesn't stop transmission, and if the vaccine doesn't stop you being infected, but the good news is if you catch it, you either won't suffer or it'll be much lighter, then in a sense, what's the point of the passport? It doesn't. What does it serve? What does it achieve apart from government control?
Well, it's a very good question, Richard, and I think that's what it boils down to, the idea that everybody is suddenly put onto a national data system where things are being monitored. They're unnecessary, they're completely illogical, and they're illiberal. And we just shouldn't have them. And I'd encourage people that are watching, listening, to sign the togetherdeclaration.org. Have your voices heard. It can make a difference. We know that there's a lot of people who are upset about it, but they're absolutely unnecessary, and we should challenge them at every time.
And in terms of the position amongst Conservative MPs, what's your understanding of the numbers of those MPs who would be against vaccine passports? And do you think they'll get a vote in the House of Commons on it?
Well, one of the things is that I think the government realised they can't make this mandatory unless they get legislation for it, and they're concerned about that. And there'll be some legal challenges as well. We know that some people have been very vocal on this, people like Steve Baker and Mark Harper and others, Serene Brady and the COVID Recovery Group. I don't know the exact number. It could be between 50 and 60, but it's also really important, and others have said this, that others in the Labour Party who have said that they're opposed to this, my MP, for instance, has told me she's opposed to it, actually vote on that basis, regardless of anything else, and come together. And some have done that in Labour and the Lib Dems as well. But this is what needs to happen, as well as the public letting their MPs know how they feel about it. Don't underestimate the impact of that.
Interesting. I mean, I think that there are so many Tory MPs who have real concerns about it, but they have got to step up to the plate. And being heard about, to really make their voices heard. Otherwise, this government has a track record of just running roughshod over people. And I just think that there's so many times when we can't trust what the government says. And they've flip-flopped on this passport idea for so long. And just talk to us about the potential cost for, whether it's nightclubs, whether it's restaurants. What's the cost implication for businesses who've suffered so much if they have to introduce some form of passport system?
Well, this thing is completely going to be in disarray. The idea that this is going to work rationally, even if they did implement it, is a nonsense. The issue of having more security, of checking everything, of making sure those names are there. I can tell you that people that are developing QR codes, they won't necessarily be linked to their name. You won't come with a face unless you try and do what we're seeing in parts of Australia. And we know it can complete control. And what's going to happen is it'll be bad faith. It'll be a pantomime, because like with tests to enter, there'll be all sorts of ways of blagging it and not checking it. So we go through this whole motion for something that's entirely unnecessary. It's enormously costly for hospitality. We know that hundreds of thousands of jobs have gone down, tens of thousands of businesses through the policy of lockdown. It was the policy of lockdown, not the actual pandemic.
And those businesses have suffered so much. Well, Alan, we've got Rudy in Exeter on the line to, I think, have a question or an observation about vaccine passports. Rudy, good morning.
Hi there, Richard. Basically, there's a couple of points. One is I think it's got nothing to do with COVID. I think it's a way that they can track our movements and where we go and what we do. But I want to know is how are illegal migrants going to operate if you need a vaccine passport?
Just say that again. Sorry, Rudy.
How are illegal migrants going to operate in the country if they need a vaccine passport to do anything?
Well, there's a very good question. I mean, there are so many questions like that as to, I mean, whoever you are, whether you're a migrant, legal or illegal, in a sense, the government is trying to get as many people vaccinated as it can persuade. And then they would presumably have the opportunity of, well, you get your certificate on the app, so they would have the same certificate as anybody else. But I think, Alan, this issue of you raised the point about is it really about COVID, or Alan, do you think it's more about the potential for data and control? And what does it lead to in the future?
I think there's been a huge overreach. I think what started off as an intention to really deal with the really serious challenge that everyone was unsure about has now morphed into something. We've seen policies of when in doubt, regulate. Restrictions of the public in the last 10 to 15 years have been quite endemic as it happens around licensing and the public activity. This has now been put onto steroids in this. And the whole idea of just completely bulldozing things through. So Parliament's effectively has been suspended. The Coronavirus Act is being discussed. Hopefully it won't get renewed, but it looks like it will do. We're seeing a constant imposition on the public. Just take the example of Israel for a second. They had a very successful vaccine rollout. We're now seeing the situation that lots of people are now going into hospital who've had the vaccine. We've seen a very important research come out saying that if you have not had it, you've got stronger immunity. The vaccine passports are a nonsense. They don't make any sense.
So let's pick up that point about Israel, and there's now talk about booster jabs. I think they're having them in Israel as well, and there's talk about booster jabs here in the UK, although again, I think I'm right that the JCVI has not yet ruled that boosters should be given to people. So if we go down the route of boosters for certain groups of people, presumably that adds to the complications if you've got vaccine passports.
It consolidates the biggest problem, because what you end up doing is you're constantly having to renew your status for normality to participate in society. These are just wrong. Winston Churchill dispensed with them when they were, a long time ago. The British public has never voted for them. We did not want them. We should not allow digital health IDs on apps or anything else. We should not have it foisted and allow it to be foisted on hospitality or anyone else. And the public really needs to have their voices heard. And I'd encourage them to sign together declaration.org.
Fantastic. Well, look, Alan, thank you so much. That's Alan Miller, the campaigner for Open for All and signatory of the Together Declaration, giving his clear views against vaccine passports. It's been a very busy hour. It's raised a lot of issues, a lot of concerns, and a lot of calls have come in, tweets have come in, and I think there's real anger out there. Interestingly, one tweet, fairly brutal on the language, saying there's no middle ground on jabbing children. This is such a big issue. We'll come back to it. For now, though, it is 10:57, and you're listening to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Live at 11, I'm Chloe Colpin. Prince Charles's former aide steps down from a royal charity accused of helping a Saudi businessman receive an honour. The Taliban breaks up women's rights protests in Afghanistan. And a surfer dies after being attacked by a shark on Australia's east coast. A former aide to Prince Charles has stepped down from his role at a royal charity following claims he offered to help secure an honour for a rich Saudi donor. Michael Fawcett, a former valet to the Prince, has temporarily left his job as chief executive of the Prince's Foundation. The Sunday Times reports he coordinated support for a CBE to be given to the businessman in 2016 after Royal Charities received a £1.5 million donation from him. The Prince's Foundation says Mr Fawcett supports and will assist in its investigation. Plans to overhaul England's social care system could be unveiled as early as this week as the government holds talks on the issue over the weekend. The current system is under pressure with past governments failing to properly fund or reform it, but a shake-up would cost billions. It's reported the Prime Minister is facing pressure from his own MPs not to increase national insurance to pay for it, as that would break a manifesto pledge. The Vaccines Minister says if 12 to 15-year-olds are offered a COVID jab, parental consent will be required. Nadine Zahawi says a final decision has not yet been made on whether to offer vaccines widely to children. The Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation decided against backing the vaccination of healthy youngsters. He also said vaccine passports will be introduced for larger venues in a bid to prevent closures over the winter. The Taliban has broken up women's rights protests in Kabul. Social media footage shows guns being fired into the air to disperse crowds. Witnesses say tear gas and tasers were also used at the protest yesterday. Women marched through the Afghan capital for the second day in a row, demanding their freedoms are guaranteed under the new Islamist regime. A surfer has died after being bitten by a shark off the east coast of Australia. The man was believed to be in his late 20s and was bitten in the arm as he surfed near the Emerald Beach. Local police say the man died from significant injuries.
It was incredibly devastating for everyone involved on the beach today. A number of bystanders, local surfers, came to the man's aid, and they were very brave in a very challenging situation.
Paralympics closing ceremony gets underway in the next half an hour with gold medalist David Smith carrying the flag for Team GB, who bagged 2 more bronze medals on the final day in men's wheelchair basketball and badminton. It marks the end of a hugely successful games for GB, who finished second in the table with 124 medals, just behind China. Quick look at the weather. Most areas will be warm and dry with some sunny spells. That is your live news on Talk Radio TV. Much more in half an hour.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk on Talk Radio. It's 11:03 and we have had a spicy, punchy first hour. We've been talking about the JCVI advice on vaccinating 12 to 15-year-olds. We've been talking vaccine passports, and it has certainly got people going with the calls and the tweets. A tweet here from someone called I Can't Really Say, saying, Talk Radio, Richard, you are in your own little world. No one I know has an issue with vaccine passports or IDs. You are a little group making a noise. Well, that's interesting because and it's good to have a range of views. Someone else tweets that, Richard, I've said from the beginning I wouldn't have a COVID passport, even though I've had both jabs, and I still would not have the COVID passport. So there we are. Lots of different thoughts and views. Keep your views, calls coming in. 0344 499 1000. Text us on 87222. Tweet at Talk Radio. Well, in the second hour, we're going to be moving on. We're going to be focusing initially on my big Sunday spotlight for the next half hour, and then we're going to be talking about immigration and moving on to Nightingale hospitals. For my big Sunday spotlight, you may recall last weekend I talked about the public utility Southern Water that was owned by overseas shareholders, including a Chinese billionaire, and that they were making huge profits and paying it out to shareholders whilst vast quantities, 7,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools of sewage were being dumped into the sea off our southern shores. Well, we've done a bit more work this week into the ownership of public utilities by this Chinese billionaire. And I have to say, I think you're going to be quite astonished by what I'm about to reveal. I believe that this Chinese billionaire, Li Ka-shing, through his various Chinese holding companies, I think he's the biggest single owner of public utilities here in the UK. He owns all of UK Power Networks, which provides the cables and electricity distribution to the southeast of England and London. He owns Northern Gas Networks, Northumbrian Water, Wales and West Gas Utilities, as well as he's got a stake in Seabank Power Station, as well as his 10 to 20% stake in Southern Water. Imagine a Chinese billionaire being the biggest owner of our public utilities. And it's pretty profitable business, folks. I have to tell you, he is making about £1.2 billion every single year from owning our monopoly utilities. That's your and my money, and that's what he's making. Now, of that 1.2 billion, he's actually literally taking out, back to China, I guess, but out of the companies, almost £600 million a year. He's leaving the rest in, presumably, for future investment. The percentage return on his investment is extraordinary. And I'll just give you an idea. You know, the government's looking for a return. If you invest with the government, you might get 1.5% on your money. Pension funds are looking to earn between 3, 4, maybe 5% on the money that they invest on behalf of pension holders. Well, this Chinese billionaire, he's not earning 3 or 4%. He's earning 19 to 20% every year on his money through the ownership of our public utilities. Now, all of us know that our utility bills, we know that they've been rising and rising. And yes, they're regulated. But my observation to you is it really right that these huge profits, enormous profits, are being made by overseas shareholders, in particular Chinese shareholders? And, you know, let's remember, Chinese companies, ultimately, they have to listen to the Chinese communist regime. So no doubt this billionaire has links or ties with the Chinese communist regime, because essentially every firm in China does. How do you feel about this? Give us a call, 0344 499 1000, as to whether you're comfortable that these huge profits are being taken away from the UK and going back to China. Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by my guest to discuss this further. Sam Armstrong is the Director of Communications for the Henry Jackson Society and has written papers and looked into many issues around China and their ownership and their Belt and Road Initiative. Sam, a very good morning to you. These numbers that are being made, these huge profits by this Chinese billionaire, how do you think people, the general public, will react when they really understand the enormous returns being made by ever-increasing bills here in the UK?
Well, look, Richard, I take my hat off to you, because these are extraordinary revelations. And often what people don't necessarily understand is that company ownerships aren't that transparent or easy to work out. And often in cases involving this, there's shell companies and all the rest of it that make it very difficult to work out who really owns what. But I think what we can clearly say in this case, that for your listeners, no matter where they are in the country, if they've got right now the kettle turned on, the water heater through the gas heating their electricity, or just the faucet running water at their home, the money that they are spending is being sent straight in the direction of China. And there are two reasons why I think this is really serious. The first is, as you say, there's British taxpayers' money here. They've not got a choice about who they pay electricity fees too. It's still all going back to the same universal generation network. Same with gas. Same with water. That money's all getting sent off to China. But the second is, and I'm sure we'll come on to this, is that these are our critical national supplies. Without these, the whole country literally shuts down. And we've been left in a position where over a number of years, ever slowly, we have been handing over more and more and more and more of our critical national infrastructure to a country that increasingly wishes us harm. We've seen that China is being all too happy to put its arm around the Taliban. It's gleeful about our defeat. And the question we've got to ask is it a good thing for them to own the capacity to turn off the lights and the water taps?
I mean, it feels to me that not only has over decades, the Conservatives who essentially were responsible for selling off the utilities, and by allowing a complete and utter free-for-all, you've ended up with so much of these public utilities. I believe some 50% of the population, one way or the other, are essentially paying money to one of his companies. Essentially, we are now exposed. Not only is it financially incredibly foolish for the reasons that I've mentioned earlier, but strategically, I mean, it's actually possible, I guess, that the Chinese communist regime, they could literally say, we want you to turn the lights out for half an hour in London, just to show us who's in charge. I mean, is that possible? And do you think that in that hideous scenario, the government's got a plan B or C in order to step in and resolve it?
Well, look, China has this thing called the National Intelligence Law. It's passed in 2017 and it applies to anyone who is doing business in China. And what it does is requires all those that are subject, anyone in China, to listen and follow the orders of the Chinese security authorities, the Ministry of State Security, the People's Liberation Army. If they say jump, you ask how high. But what's more than that, it also requires in law that if anybody external were to ask you about, have you received a request, you must, by Chinese law, or face life imprisonment in the gulag, you must lie about it. Wow. So if the question is, are people in China subject to the whims of the Chinese Communist Party? Yes, and it's written into law. So then you've got to ask yourself, well, what could they do? Well, if you own the company, you can direct investment. So you can say, oh, well, don't put anything there. You can order your staff in this country to do whatever you'd like. So the situation you outline of China literally being able to order to these businessmen to turn off the lights isn't just a fantasy. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's the bare facts of Chinese law.
I mean, I just think this is utterly extraordinary. We are strategically exposed to a country that may not wish us well, being able to literally have this impact on our critical infrastructure. And if we look at France or America, as I understand, they actually have laws which would prevent this sort of strategic exposure, this sort of vulnerability to overseas ownership of critical infrastructure. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. So it's not just France and the US. The US has a system called CFIUS. Would never have allowed what we've allowed. France and in fact, the entirety of Europe has these systems in which if you are a critical part of the French or Italian or German economy, you can be sold off under certain circumstances, but the Italian or German or French state maintains the ability to control your company. Just this week, we saw a case in Italy. Italian drone manufacturer had secretly been sold off to the Chinese, had sent them out a drone. Well, what's happened there? Well, the Italian directors have literally been jailed for that. That company, they have faced criminal consequences for having passed over that sensitive asset to the Chinese. In the UK, not only would you not get jailed, you'd get a bonus. And indeed there, they'd found that the Chinese company, surprise, surprise, had greatly overvalued this Italian firm in an attempt to get the IP. So we are way behind where we are, where our allies are. We have got this new bill called the National Security and Investment Bill that would allow the business secretary to step in, but they've passed the law and it doesn't even come into effect until the end of the year, meaning that takeovers are happening now still aren't subject to it.
Which just seems to me complete madness. Now, which MPs are asking questions and making a noise about this? Because I find this really worrying, given the direction of travel of the world order, the changes we've seen just in recent weeks. The rising dominance of China, their extended reach across the world with their Belt and Road Initiative. Many people thought that may just apply in Africa, for example, but actually what I'm discovering is their Belt and Road Initiative, their dominance extends across the UK in our critical infrastructure. Who in Parliament is going to raise this and ensure that we get change and that the British people are protected?
Well, I know you had Bob Seeley on the programme last week. He has been a fantastic voice. You've got others there, Nuz Ghani, Ian Duncan Smith. And actually, credit to them, I am not a supporter of the Labour Party, but you've had actually a lot of good Labour supporting MPs on this issue that have been keen to raise it. Sarah Champion, who also famously spoke out against child grooming gangs, and Stephen Kinnock, who represents a working class steel making community and gets the fact that selling off these critical assets to foreign companies that don't all of a sudden have our best interests at heart is deeply, deeply dangerous. But I'm afraid on the other side, you've got ministers in government, including Lord Grimstone in particular, who have been actively pushing for ever more Chinese investment into the UK economy and couldn't care less about the security risks.
Well, Sam, stay with us. We're going to take a quick break. If you've got some thoughts on this, then do call us 0344 499 1000. Whether you're happy or not that there's huge Chinese control of our public utilities, our critical national infrastructure. The time's 11:17. This is Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
DAB Plus and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. We've got lots of tweets coming in on the various issues on vaccine passports. Kev, he says, I own a gym, beauty salon and the cafe. If I have to ask for papers, I'll shut the businesses down. 15 people will lose their jobs. I'm 100% not going to enter into medical apartheid. That's clear from Kev. You can't please everybody, and it looks as though the Phantom Menace, I'm afraid that I've sent him to sleep. He says that I could talk a glass eye to sleep, so that doesn't impress him. But then an anonymous number here says, excellent work. How much of these profits are spent keeping some of our politicians quiet? Why they're not exposed? Well, we're trying to expose them. We're trying to highlight the risks, the huge profits going overseas. And that's why we're still talking to Sam Armstrong, who is the Director of Communications at Henry Jackson Society. Sam, thanks for staying with us. So what's the answer here? Should we be looking to, in a sense, renationalise a percentage or all of our public utilities? Or should we just essentially restrict ownership to UK pension funds, UK investors? Where are you on this?
Yeah, so what I say on this is quite clear, but there's no reason to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are real legitimate security concerns about overseas ownership, but that shouldn't mean that we shouldn't allow our allies in Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the US to hold parts of British companies. They've done so for many years, and we have been the beneficiaries of that. But what you've got to have is a system for regulating the security risks. Now, many countries overseas have what's called a golden share. We have it in some companies, in which the government retains the capacity to force that company to do certain things if it were to risk or jeopardize the national security. To me, that seems like a sensible balance. I get why people want to renationalise, but we've got to remember why we privatised some of these companies in the first place. That is because British Rail and others were providing a pretty hopeless service, actually, at a great expense to the taxpayer.
So what about the middle ground, where you say, well, yes, you might want some private sector expertise, you might want some friendly overseas investment, from some of our sort of our known allies. But maybe if you've got good private sector management doing a great job, investing, creating profits, maybe the government, of course the government money is essentially taxpayers' money, let's remember, then actually if the government owned a stake in the business, let's say 50% or 51%, then maybe you actually get the best of both worlds, that the taxpayers are benefiting from that private sector expertise alongside the long-term infrastructure investors and the pension funds investors. What about that sort of halfway house where you've got the taxpayer benefiting as well and you've got legal control to prevent the risks?
Yeah, so look, I think that what needs to happen is a hybrid model, and I'm pretty ambivalent if it's taxpayers actually having a stake, or if they have a stake that gives them control but not access to the profits, if you see what I mean. And it's really important for one reason. I'll give you one example of why it really matters. There's a UK company called Bioproducts Limited, the world's leading manufacturer in advanced blood products for people who need infusions of specialist blood products. A few years ago, it was a British government-owned company. We sold it to an American company, Bain. It's one of the biggest private equity firms in the world. That was fine. There was no security risk there whatsoever. Then what happened is, despite the controversy at the time, the government said, look, it's going to Bain, it's a good company. A few years later, Bain then flipped the company to a Chinese company called Create Blood Products. Now, there have been no particular allegations against Create, and I wouldn't want to insinuate there have. But we do know that the Chinese life products industry is riddled with forced organ harvesting and the exploitation of Chinese minorities. Now, we've had a system in which a British company owned by the British government has, within 5 years, gone from that status to being tied up in Chinese ownership that raises severe ethical concerns. And my point is, what you need to be able to do is you need to have some form of long-term stake. So whether that's a golden share, whether that's 50%, I think you need it, and you need it in pretty much every single circumstance.
I mean, that's the point, isn't it? And it's the same with this electricity company. It was actually sold to the French company EDF, and then they sold it they sold UK Power Networks to the Chinese, and there was no golden share, no ability, as I understand, for the government to stop that. And so we continually end up selling the crown jewels, and so much is ending up in a sense owned by Chinese interests. There's another tweet coming here concerned about when the Chinese communist regime would instruct the Chinese billionaire literally to turn things off. And I think, of course, they would say that that's never going to happen. We wouldn't do it. Why run the risk? Why allow ourselves to be so exposed? I think there are serious questions to ask here, and I think it's incumbent on our MPs. And you touched there on important businesses in life sciences. There's the same issue, isn't there, Sam, in defence companies, some of which are being bid for by private equity groups literally as we speak.
Yeah, so Meggitt, which makes the metallic parts that go inside our F-35 fighter jets, some of the most important components we'll ever see, risk getting sold off to, in the first instance, a US firm, but it's not hard to see how once it's sort of left the door, you can't control it anymore. And we have had, I think, according to my records, there are 6 British firms that supply the defence industry that have been sold directly to Chinese companies in the last 10 years. That's 6 British firms that make defence components a part of our defence supply chain, openly so, direct suppliers, and they've been sold to Chinese companies.
Well, I mean, I just think there's so much of this, and I think that government after government have adopted a complete laissez-faire, open sort of free markets for all, which I just think has gone way too far. And I think it's fair to say, Sam, that the tweets here seem to support that. One here from Chris saying all of the utilities could be turned off using the software. No need to ask the people. Another saying doing a good job exposing this. Very worrying and deep concerns about it. Another here saying all roads lead to China and the Chinese Communist Party regime. Sam, thank you so much for your thoughts. I know we're going to come back to it. I know you're doing great work, but it's vital that all of us encourage our MPs to ask serious questions of our government about why we are allowing ourselves to be so exposed, so vulnerable. Sam Armstrong, the Director of Communications at the Henry Jackson Society, a big, big thank you. That was our big Sunday Spotlight expose about Chinese ownership of our utilities. If you've got any thoughts on that, give us a call, 0344 499 1000. We're going to be talking shortly about immigration, about foreign criminals not being deported. But I want your thoughts, your views in the second half of the show, because there's some massive, massive topics going on. Vaccinating children. What are the ministers going to do when Chris Whitty has made his ruling? What are they going to do about vaccine passports, even though we know that COVID can still be transmitted, or you can still catch it if you've been vaccinated? I mean, it's so clear to me that the government, they can avoid much of this anger and this division if they adopt a middle way. But at the moment, the indications are really concerning that they're going the wrong way. Well, it's approaching 11:30. It is still grey outside. I really do want to try and see the sun at some point. Maybe there's a heat wave coming this week. You're listening to Tice Talk, and it is, of course, the home of common sense. It's Talk Radio.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Here are your headlines. I'm Chloe Culpen. Prince Charles's former aide steps down from a royal charity accused of helping a Saudi businessman receive an honour. And a surfer dies after being attacked by a shark on Australia's east coast. A A former aide to Prince Charles has stepped down from his role at a royal charity following claims he offered to help secure an honour for a rich Saudi donor. Michael Fawcett, a former valet to the Prince, has temporarily left his job as chief executive of the Prince's Foundation. The Sunday Times reports he coordinated support for a CBE to be given to the businessman in 2016 after royal charities received a £1.5 million donation from him. The Prince's Foundation says Mr Fawcett supports its investigation. Plans to overhaul England's social care system could be unveiled as early as this week as the government holds talks on the issue over the weekend. The current system is under pressure, with past governments failing to properly fund or reform it, but a shake-up would cost billions. It's reported the Prime Minister is facing pressure from his own MPs not to increase national insurance to pay for it, as that would break a manifesto pledge. The Vaccines Minister says if 12 to 15-year-olds are offered a COVID jab, parental consent will be required. Nadeem Zahawi says a final decision has not yet been made on whether to offer vaccines widely to children. Last week, the JCVI decided against backing vaccination of healthy youngsters. A surfer has died after being bitten by a shark off the east coast of Australia. The man was believed to be in his late 20s and was bitten in the arm as he surfed near the Emerald Beach. Paralympics closing ceremony gets underway shortly, with gold medalist David Smith carrying the flag for Team GB, who bagged 2 more bronze medals on the final day in the men's wheelchair basketball, and from Christian Coombs in badminton. That is your news on Talk Radio TV. More in half an hour.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk on Talk Radio. It's 11:33, and the results so far on our Twitter poll, which says, should the government heed the JCVI recommendation not that children should not be vaccinated, children of 12 to 15. So far, 87% of you, 87% say the government ministers should heed the advice of the JCVI. So that's pretty clear. But if you've got your thoughts, your views, do send them in or give us a call, 0344 499 1000. We need to move on. We need to talk about the Home Secretary, the Home Office, and what on earth they are doing. Because we've got the situation where we know that there are record numbers of illegal migrants crossing the channel. We've got some calm, warm days ahead, so we know that there'll probably continue to be even more coming over. Some 12,000 people have already come this year. Continually, Priti Patel gives warm words, reassuring words that she's going to get it sorted, and yet the situation gets worse and worse. And we then read that it's the illegal immigrants, there are some 70,000 here costing over 1.4 billion a year, and then that there are over 11,000 criminals, foreign criminals, who have committed crimes here in the UK, who've then not been deported. Well, I'm delighted to be joined by Martin Dorby, the deputy leader of Reclaim, the Reclaim Party, and a former MEP, to talk about this issue. A very good morning to you, Martin. Great to see you. Thanks for joining us. So look, is Priti Patel up to the job here? What's going on in all these different issues? It seems that she talks a great game, but nothing seems to happen. There seems to be no action behind these words.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that, Richard. By the way, the show has been excellent so far today, and the vaccine passport conversation you've been having, the vaccinating children has been really a breath of fresh air. It's great to hear these things. And before we move on, I think if they press on with vaccinating children, as they seem to be doing, I think it's going to be the Tories' poll tax moment. I really think the people will turn on this government. And around to this topic, it's symptomatic of the same problem. We have gone weak on illegal immigration. Don't forget, you and I had this conversation pre-Brexit referendum. After the vote, it was the number one topic on voters' lips. Then it was completely denied by the media. People who had concerns about the volume and the pace of immigration, not against immigration per se, just the sheer amount. We couldn't get doctors' appointments, school places were seeing their wages suppressed. They were dismissed as racist and xenophobic. And here we are again, Richard. It's like we're back having the same conversation. And isn't it funny how we've all been locked up in our homes and haven't been allowed to go abroad, and yet Britain is welcoming to all those coming over in dinghies, to Dover, positively towing them ashore. And this is a huge concern, particularly to red wall politicians. I speak to a lot of Tory MPs about this, and they are really concerned that their Home Secretary is going soft on this issue, and those voters are really dismayed that the Tories promised us that once we left the European Union, we'd be able to control our borders in a more effective manner, when we can see now Border Force is about effective the Border Collie. They are absolutely terrible on this issue.
I keep talking about this critical word called leadership, and whether it's the Prime Minister or the Home Secretary, or indeed, she keeps appointing new sort of grand-sounding heads of various parts of the Border Force to try and reassure us and give us confidence. But there just doesn't seem to be the political will to deal with this issue. And how concerned are you, Martin, about the risk now? Look, we've had this crisis, this disaster in Afghanistan, which is clearly going to lead to a humanitarian crisis. And we've obviously done the right thing by saying, of course, we're going to take in Afghans, and we have done already, to whom we owed an obligation, who helped us in Afghanistan. But the risk now, Martin, how worried are you about the risk that most of the illegal migrants coming across the channel will simply say, I've lost my papers, I'm from Afghanistan?
It's a no-brainer. If you understand the human trafficking industry as I do, if you speak to people who go to Calais and spend time tracing this route back, people are advised all the time about how to play the system and how to say the right thing to ensure safe passage and get the refugee asylum process rolling. And of course, you would say that you're from Afghanistan, and of course you would make sure you had no documentation to prove anything to the contrary. So it's an absolute certainty that this will happen. And people are getting really dismayed about this. And back to the thing about the political will, it's not only that there's a lack of political will, Richard, it's worse than that. We are seeing senior top brass at the Labour Party, such as Diane Abbott, actively campaigning for murderers and paedophiles to be taken off deportation flights because of their human rights may be violated. And you have to wonder, is Britain becoming a country for its citizens or a welcoming place for criminals? I think you know the answer. We have a completely broken system. And one of the huge opportunities that we talked about so much was the ability to uncouple from the European Court of Human Rights, which of course isn't the same thing as the European Union. But the European Union made it a red line that we weren't even allowed to talk about. That's right. And that is the process and the system that enables all of these claims for periods of grace and extended stays, claiming against the case in Reading that's in the papers today, the jihadi who murdered 3 people in the park. 5 times we tried to deport him. £107,000 of taxpayers' money and legal aid went to him. A known terrorist, a child soldier from Libya. And we couldn't even get him out of the country. So what hope the 11,000 others that we can't get out that legally should be kicked out of the country, yet there isn't the will to do it.
It's quite extraordinary, Martin. There you've got a Conservative government with an 80-seat majority. They talk a good game. They say all the right words under the Home Secretary. And yet, actually, in terms of when you look at the action, the deeds, the situation is getting worse, not better. You know, we've always been a welcoming, hospitable country. But with rights comes responsibilities, and it is quite clear that our authorities, the Home Office, they are simply at the moment not up to the job. And my concern is that the Prime Minister, he doesn't hold any of his ministers to account, and the Home Office are continuing to fail. Martin Dorby, thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Well, there we are. Real concerns about what the Home Office is not doing to control the rising illegal immigration, what it's not doing in terms of deporting foreign criminals who we should no longer have on these shores. Coming up after the break, we're going to be talking about the NHS capacity crisis as we head towards the winter, and Nightingale hospitals. I had a piece in the Telegraph. Stay with us. You're listening to Tice Talk, and this is, of course, Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk on Talk Radio. It's 11:45 here this Sunday morning. It is still grey outside. During the week, I wrote an article in the Daily Telegraph about rebuilding capacity in the NHS so that it could cope with whatever is thrown at it this winter. And I recalled the words of a former Prime Minister, a real leader, Benjamin Disraeli. He once wrote, "I'm prepared for the worst, but hope for the best." And in a sense, that's so true in so many walks of life, it seems to me. You know, in business, I always say, you need to have, yes, you've got your plan A, but you've got to have a plan B, C, and D, just so we're ready. And of course, we all hope that the worst of the COVID crisis is over. But we don't know. The reality is we have to be prepared for tough times ahead, whether it's a new variant, whether it's a really bad flu epidemic, whether it's a variant that evades the vaccines, whether the vaccines wane faster than people hoped, or a brutally cold winter that fills our hospitals. And we know the NHS is at full stretch. It's desperately trying to get on top of huge waiting lists, trying to catch up on diagnostics, on scanning people. We know that GPs are massively struggling. And my concern is that there's almost no spare capacity in the system. And you know, every year, pre-COVID, we used to have the same headlines about the worst NHS winter crisis ever. And I wrote a controversial piece saying that maybe we should rebuild the Nightingale hospitals this autumn to give us that capacity before it's too late. You know, it's the precautionary principle. And because the total capacity of the NHS, the Nightingale hospitals, was about 15,000 beds. That's about 10% of all the beds in the NHS across the whole of the UK. And we know that there's actually been a loss of bed capacity because of COVID. The reason that Nightingales weren't used the first time was because that they didn't organise the staffing. They didn't have a plan to bring back retired medics. And I wonder whether actually, in the same way you've got the Territorial Army with our services, with our forces, that actually we should have literally a medical reserve force of retired medics who are there on standby in the event of a crisis. And while some people thought that the Nightingales were a waste of money first time around, actually, if you had that capacity and it prevented further lockdowns, further tiers, if it kept the economy open, if it gave people confidence, then actually maybe that money is money well spent. If it gives us the ability to be prepared for whatever any form of, whether it's COVID or flu, throws at us. Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by Dr. Bob Gill, who is a GP and was the producer of a film, The Great NHS Heist, to talk about this. Bob, a very good morning. You're seeing, obviously, in your practice and with your colleagues, huge pressures. How much pressure is there on the NHS at all levels at the moment? And what are your concerns as we head into autumn?
Yes, thank you for inviting me. There is immense pressure within the NHS. COVID was really the final straw that broke the camel's back. But we've had a decade's worth of austerity applied to the NHS, which has in fact led to a 38,000 bed cut. And we've also had the staff suffering a 20% real terms wage cut, leading to mass vacancies within the NHS. So the NHS is struggling, it continues to struggle. Even before the pandemic, the waiting lists were 4.5 million. Now that's exceeded 5 million. So it has been undermined by government policy. We weren't prepared because the government chose to ignore their own preparedness exercise from 2016, exercise Cygnus.
Cygnus, yes.
And, you know, if we've learned any lessons is that government should plan ahead. It shouldn't make decisions on the hoof. It certainly shouldn't be awarding contracts to people with political connections. And the whole Nightingale Hospital fiasco, which cost in excess of £500 million and was hardly utilised. In fact, one Nightingale Hospital in Birmingham, which cost £66 million to set up, didn't see a patient. Now, this is a catastrophic waste of money. This is money that should be invested back in the NHS, building permanent NHS capacity, rather than these temporary fixes, which I'm afraid will just fail again.
Okay, and Bob, the issue, of course, is to build permanent capacity. buildings and things. Obviously, I mean, the Prime Minister talked about, 40 new hospitals during the general election, but that actually takes years of planning, construction. My real concern is how we're going to deal with this winter ahead. And in a sense, you could have a medium-term plan, and I get what you say there, but we've also got to have something to deal with the short-term pressure. Otherwise, if you're not prepared, and I fully agree with you about Operation Cygnus and things, if we're not prepared for the short term, then we face disaster again. We face the calls to protect the NHS from being overwhelmed, and then elective surgery has to be cancelled. I've even heard of one hospital who's right on the edge now of cancelling operations just in September. We need something for the short term as well as the medium term. That was the point of my article.
Sure, but your article is dealing with the issue downstream. We need to deal with the issue upstream. And the first thing we should do is to bring the test and trace system, which has been an utter catastrophic waste of money, back into public control. 37 billion has been awarded for a 2-year period, which the Public Accounts Committee Chair, Meg Hillier, described as an unimaginable resources thrown at a project that cannot point to a measurable difference in the progress of the pandemic.
And we're still testing about, give or take, 1 million people a day. And I mean, for me...
But the point is, we might be testing, but we're not providing financial support for people to isolate. So the system is still fundamentally flawed. The next thing to do is stop the continued closure of hospital beds. So this 40 new hospital building program is utter nonsense. They are defining the opening of a new wing as a new hospital, but there is a plan. The NHS long-term plan is to continue to shrink NHS capacity as part of the government's long-term privatisation agenda. So we need to address the current threats that the NHS is facing rather than looking for downstream expensive solutions that have already shown us not to work.
But how concerned? Yeah, I hear all that, but none of that deals with my question about the capacity issue this coming winter and the risks of the government having to, or being tempted to impose some measures in order to protect NHS capacity. And I think we've got to get prepared and ready for that in some way.
The best preparation is to stop the spread of the pandemic, to have mitigation in schools, to have effective contact tracing, and to support people to isolate. Then you wouldn't have the NHS collapsing in a heap, and you wouldn't need this extra capacity. We need to fix the problem downstream, and the way the government has chosen to do it, to award multi-billion-pound contracts to accountancy firms, for goodness sake, who have no experience in healthcare. This is a travesty, and we don't want to build upon one mistake after the other with a solution which doesn't work and has already been shown not to work. Capacity within the NHS, if we need to, in the short term, we take over existing public facilities, leisure centres and whatever. We can set up temporary hospitals if that is a need. We can take over the private hospital capacity and use that to look after COVIDly sick patients. But we need to prevent the rise in cases in the first place.
Sure, but I was also talking about concerns about, and I think some people are concerned about, a significant flu epidemic. In a sense, whether it's COVID or something else, the NHS needs to have some capacity. That's my real point. And there's always the risk, given the huge numbers of adults who've been vaccinated, but we've got obviously that some of the vaccines, in a sense, for the elderly people, they may start to wane. There are risks ahead. We all hope that the worst is over, but I just think, Bob, that we've got to have a plan B in a sense that we hope is not used. And so, yes, you face the criticism that it's money wasted, but actually, if it prevents a much more serious sort of sequence of events, then in a sense, the opportunity cost of that money is actually well spent. But it feels to me you're not of that view.
I'm not of that view. And the other problem I have with your article is the normalization of using volunteers, exploiting people's goodwill, rather than stopping the hemorrhage of qualified staff, which we currently face in the NHS. As I mentioned earlier, there's been a staff cut. They've had a horrendous 2 years of immense strain and psychological toll. And we are facing the biggest loss of NHS permanent staff that anybody can imagine. So to normalise the use of temporary volunteers is not a good idea.
Sean, and I was absolutely not saying to normalise it. I was really saying as a contingency plan that we hope is never used, to have people on standby, a bit like the TIA. That was the difference, Bob. And it's being prepared for the worst, but hoping, of course, that they're never used. I would have thought that's good planning, good preparation,
but
good
there are other ways.
capacity.
You can take over control of existing facilities, as I've mentioned, without building anything else. Use local leisure centres, use public halls, public spaces, call in the volunteers if they're willing to work, but that is a last resort. We do not need to hand another £500 million to contractors to build facilities that we won't use.
But so I think you're agreeing we need to have capacity, but you're saying there may be better, more cost-effective ways of doing it.
We need to stop reducing the current capacity. We need to halt the bed closure program. We need to stem the flow of staff out of the NHS. And if we do need to expand capacity, we have a plan that doesn't waste money.
Well, there we are. That is Dr. Bob Gill, who has a very clear view that we must stop reducing capacity. He believes that there are better ways to be prepared for whatever the winter may throw at us, using capacity that's possibly available in private hospitals or in converting leisure halls or other things. I think the real point is, what I'm highlighting is the worst of all worlds is that we end up not being prepared. The worst of all worlds is we get to November or December and something comes and bites us in the backside, whether it's a COVID variant, whether it's a flu epidemic, and we're not prepared. Because then I think, the consequences for that would be utterly, utterly awful. Well, give us your thoughts. Give us a ring, 0344 499 1000. You're listening to Tice Talk. It is here at the home of common sense. It's the one, the only, the right one to listen to. It's Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Live at 12, I'm Chloe Culpen. Prince Charles's former aide steps down from a royal charity accused of helping a Saudi businessman receive an honour. The PM under pressure over social care funding as its reported plans could be revealed this week. And a surfer dies after being attacked by a shark on Australia's east coast. A former aide to Prince Charles has stepped down from his role at a royal charity following claims he offered to help secure an honour for a rich Saudi donor. Michael Fawcett, a former valet to the Prince, has temporarily left his job as chief executive of the Prince's Foundation. The Sunday Times reports he coordinated support for a CBE to be given to the businessman in 2016 after royal charities received £1.5 million from him. The Prince's Foundation says Mr Fawcett supports and will assist in its investigation. Plans to overhaul England's social care system could be unveiled as early as this week, following government talks over the weekend. The current system is under pressure, with past administrations failing to properly fund or reform it, but a shake-up would cost billions. It's reported the Prime Minister is facing pressure from his own MPs not to increase national insurance to pay for it, as that would break a manifesto pledge. Parental consent will be required if 12 to 15-year-olds are offered a COVID jab. However, Vaccine Minister Nadhim Tahawi has told Times Radio that children will be able to override their parents' refusal for them to have the jab if they are deemed competent to make the decision. Mr Tahawi says a final decision has not yet been made on whether to offer the vaccines widely to healthy youngsters. Around 50 high street shops per day are closing following the pandemic. Research shows in the first 6 months of the year, more than 8,700 chain stores closed, with city centres suffering the worst. A surfer has died after being attacked by a shark off the east coast of Australia. The man was believed to be in his late 20s and was bitten in the arm as he surfed near the Emerald Beach. Police in New South Wales say the man died from significant injuries.
It was incredibly devastating for everyone involved on the beach today. A number of bystanders, local surfers, came to the man's aid, and they were very brave in a very challenging situation.
The Paralympics closing ceremony is underway, with gold medalist David Smith carrying the flag for Team GB, who bagged 2 more bronze medals on the final day in the men's wheelchair basketball and from Christian Coombs in the badminton. It marks the end of a hugely successful Games for GB, who finished second in the table with 124 medals, just behind China. Quick look at the weather. Most areas will be warm and dry with some sunny spells. That is your live news on Talk Radio TV. Much more in half an hour.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk on Talk Radio. Good afternoon. Well, we've had a busy morning. We've been talking about the JCVI advice not to vaccinate 12 to 15-year-olds, what people feel about that. We had a big debate on that. We've been talking about vaccine passports. We've been talking about the Chinese billionaire making massive profits from our public utilities, from British customers, and big important issues of the day. And it's time now to look forwards and to talk about the Extinction Rebellion protests and other protests, and what's going on, and the policing of these protests, because they've been going on now. I think it must be at least 2 weeks. Every day in central London, there seem to be hundreds of police out or on standby to deal with the potential consequences of these Extinction Rebellion protests. And I've got a number of issues and a number of concerns about this. Firstly, it's just the pure quantity of police that is essentially diverted from whatever else they might have been doing in their respective communities in order to sit in vans to prepare for whether or not trouble emerges. And then the other issue we've got is the wanton damage to private property that is being carried out by these protesters, which I just find utterly extraordinary. Whether it's spraying red paint on people's buildings, into fountains in front of Buckingham Palace. And just the other day, there's a video of these Extinction Rebellion protesters with literally with hammers trying to break the glass in a building, I think it was in the City of London, hammering away with their hammers, and extraordinarily, no one seemed to be stopping them. And I thought, what's going on here? Why are we just allowing people to deliberately just carry out wanton criminal damage? And I think, you know, the police have had a horrendous time, and they've had this to deal with. They've had some really vile, ugly protests by some idiotic anti-vax protesters. But I really want to sort of talk about this with someone who knows the pressures on the police. I'm delighted this afternoon to be joined by Ken Marsh, Chairman of the Police Federation. A very good afternoon to you, Ken. I think your members have had a pretty challenging time in central London over the last couple of weeks. I've seen lots of them, you know, standing on bridges, sitting in vans, sort of waiting for the inevitable. First of all, what's the mood amongst them? And in terms of your members, how tough has it been with these multiple protests and there's just relentless Extinction Rebellion protests?
Good afternoon. Yeah, and you're absolutely correct with your intro there that a real challenging time for my colleagues this has been over the last 2 weeks, coming out slowly of the COVID pandemic where, you know, they were up against it with that. The last 2 weeks has just been utter chaos for us in terms of how we're meant to deliver the policing correctly in London, because, you know, last time Extinction Rebellion were very clever and took us to court over several issues of how we policed it. So we've had to be more mindful this time so that we get it correct straight away. But as you quite rightly say, they've been chasing us around and around London. And my heart goes out to the rest of Londoners who, as you quite rightly say, are not being policed correctly by us, because we have thousands of officers in the centre of London. And I have to just add, if there was ever a reason why the new policing bill needs to go through, this is it, because it will give us the powers to deal with these people correctly so that they can't cause mayhem for the public of London. Because if we weren't there, what would happen to them? Because I'm sure the public of London would not allow it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, there is huge frustration because, look, you know, someone who's I'm often campaigning and lobbying, you know, the right to protest is a fundamental right in a democracy. But, you know, my view is that's not the right to obstruct, and it's not the right to disrupt ordinary people trying to get to work, trying to run a business, trying to earn a living. And I get that it's a fine line. And it's interesting your comments about the policing bill there. But in a sense, how is it? I guess the sort of the challenge, Ken, is you quite rightly have got police rushing in to protect what was a building in Canary Wharf, the MHRA building, from just idiotic, violent anti-vax protesters trying to break in again to private property. So, you know, the police did a great job there, but I was concerned that, you know, there was a lack of stopping these idiotic XR protesters just hammering away at doors and windows, trying to create as much damage as they could.
So there is an overview to all of this, and you clearly accept that in policing terms, from the Sky and from everywhere else, we're watching near enough everything that's going on, and it is a finite. It's decisions that have to be made very, very quickly, and these individuals are not silly. They've worked out very carefully how to deploy and what they're doing, and it's become a real cat and mouse scenario. And you're correct. Sometimes we are there quick enough to stop them completely. Other times they manage to do something, as you saw on London Bridge, etc., that we then have to deal with what's put in front of us. And all the time we have social media, the press and everyone else on our backs for what we are doing and the actions we take. And they're so quick to chastise us if we get the minutest thing, how they don't want to see it. So, my colleagues are constantly up against this from 5 a.m. till midnight sort of thing, day after day after day. And it just becomes so debilitating, so draining for them that the public are very fortunate that they've got the Metropolitan Police. That's all I can say.
And can you talk about thousands of officers, and in a sense that concerns me even more, that it's because those thousands of officers, they've come from somewhere.
Yep.
Would the majority of those have come from the Met, or are they having to be drawn in because of overtime and holidays and things from a much wider group of forces? And what's, just give us a sense of what's the knock-on impact on policing in those areas, those local communities who haven't got their bobby on the beat because they're sitting in a van waiting for Extinction Rebellion to be a pain in the backside?
Yep, so let me make this very clear. Firstly, we serve the Queen. We don't have contract of employment. All leave was cancelled. They can't do that to any other employee in the country, but they can do it to us. So, sorry, you can't have your holiday. You're going to be working. Simple as that. And it's a lawful order. So all the officers are deployed and brought in. We have brought in mutual aid from other forces just because of the sheer volume of what we're dealing with and the turnaround, because these officers who are out there are doing 12 hours on. So they've got to have a break at some time before they're back on. And I've spoken to numerous officers who have only had 5, 6, 7 hours between each 12-hour tour. And then in reflection of what you're saying around, the communities in boroughs, as I said to you earlier, my heart goes out to them because we are not policing correctly those areas. There's a thin amount of policing. We've moved the core shifts to 12 and 12 in a lot of areas, so they do an early and a night. So we moved the middle part so that we can put them on public order aid. So they're not getting what they normally get in terms of their local community policing. And that just can't be delivered the same because there is only a finite of officers. There isn't, thousands and thousands more we can just suddenly get. They are the same officers who are coming out every day.
I get that. And I just think that is... these protests that go on day after day after day, the knock-on impact, and therefore that's going to, the criminals in those communities, they're not stupid. They know there's less police about, and therefore actually those communities are more vulnerable, more exposed. Yep. It's clear to me that Extinction Rebellion are actually doing their cause huge harm by this overreach. Not only the way they're conducting these protests, the disruption they're causing, but actually this incredibly selfish knock-on impact on so many other Londoners across the whole of Greater London.
Absolutely, and as you quite rightly said, protest is in our DNA. It's a norm. We totally understand and accept that. But you've got to take people with you if you want them to understand what you're doing and be part of it and accept what you're doing. And from what we're seeing, and I said to you earlier, and I didn't say it tongue-in-cheek, I said it factually, what would happen if we weren't there as the police? Because I know what would happen to these people, because I've seen it, and I've seen the way people behave towards them. They're fed up with it, the public. They don't want it. It's affecting their lives at a time when, coming out of COVID, they are desperate to get back into employment, get back to what they're doing so that they can re-deliver, and they're being put this in front of them. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, well, and just before we close, Ken, just the policing bill that's going through. So you're supportive of that. Just give us a little flavour, a little extra help as to why that will help your police officers in this situation, because there have been lots of concerns about the policing bill and Home Secretary overreach.
Right, let me make it very clear in policing terms. If you look at what took place at the last Extinction Rebellion with the boat at Oxford Circus, we removed it. We got criticised for that and were told bizarrely that we can't do that when it's on a public highway. So when you saw the table scenario at Covent Garden, we had to observe it, we had to get evidence before we could go to court, before we could remove it. That will all stop. We'll be able to deal with things there and then under the law that's in place. Because bear in mind, a lot of our laws are from 1842, when thou shan't walk 2 sheep up a road and that sort of nonsense. We need to come with the modern times of 2021 so that when these people behave in this way, we can deal with it immediately. It's not about suppressing people's rights or anything like that. It's about keeping the highways clear so lawful people can go about their lawful business.
That's absolutely right. It's coming back to what I said, which is yes, the right to protest is absolutely fundamental in a democracy. But that doesn't give you the right to disrupt and obstruct other people's daily lives, their ability to earn, to go to their work, to earn a living, to run their business. And the timing of that policing bill, what's that looking like in terms of its being able to enact it, Ken?
So there has been some delays. Funny enough, I've got quite a few lords coming to Scotland Yard next week to talk it through. But I'm hoping within the next 6 to 8 months, we see it be delivered and put through correctly through House of Commons and then through the Lords.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Ken Marsh, for those thoughts. The constant disruption and the impact on the police force and on the wider communities around London, the cost, the opportunity cost, the risks of greater crime in broad London. I think, these Extinction Rebellion protesters, they've made their point, but actually I think they're doing their cause huge harm and their behaviour incredibly selfish. Thank you very much, Ken Marsh, the chairman of the Metropolitan Police Federation. Well, there you have it. You've heard about the Extinction Rebellion protests, about the challenges for the police. It's been a busy morning, and there's so much to discuss. Coming up after the break, we're going to be taking some calls. Give us a ring, 0344 499 1000. Text us at 87222 with your thoughts. Tweet us at Talk Radio. Don't hold back. We need to have your views, your thoughts. You're listening to Richard Tice here on Tice Talk, on, of course, the home of common sense. It's Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio. Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back. Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. It's 12:20. There is still no sign of the sun over London, but we have got some callers coming in. We've got Mike in Manchester who wants to talk about my Sunday Spotlight expose on public utilities, the huge quantity that are owned by the Chinese billionaire that I referred to. Mike, a very good morning, good afternoon to you. What are your thoughts on my Sunday Spotlight?
Yeah, good afternoon. I think it's quite alarmist, actually, the claims you're making. But what piqued my interest was you opened the topic by saying words to the effect, or quote as close as I can, doing business or dealing with some people that want to do us harm. And I don't think of the Chinese person that wants to do us harm. Can you?
Well, I think that the point that I'm raising is that the Chinese communist regime is what I was referring to. That they have a clear, a very, very long-term plan of increasing their dominance, their domination, really across the world, Mike. And I think we have to accept that they are serious competition. And we've seen from what they're doing with the Uyghur Muslims, for example, the harms they've caused in Hong Kong. I'm afraid actually, that we've seen them for what they are. The bullying they adopted, the bullying approach with Australia, when Australia suggested that there should be a proper independent inquiry into the source of the COVID leak. I fully take the point. I've always referred to the Chinese communist regime as opposed to ordinary Chinese people, because I do make a distinction. I make a difference. That was what I was referring to, and it's, in a sense, it's about reducing risk. A sovereign nation, surely, we want to reduce the risk to ourselves for our critical infrastructure that keeps the lights on, keeps us warm, and keeps us watered. That's really the point of my concerns.
The domination, that only seems to be as regards the fact they're quite astute and avaricious business people. But they, let's consider the Uyghurs, as you mentioned. Now, they did have quite a serious Islamic terrorist issue in Xinjiang, in so much a woman could walk down the street and she'd find herself having her face slashed. There's a group in China, in that area, Etam, I think they're called, and they wanted to establish a caliphate there, and they're actually associated with ISIS, and they adopt ISIS. That they're one of the.
Yeah, but Mike, there's a clear difference between terror groups and the approach that the Chinese communist regime have adopted with the Uyghurs, which has essentially been declared a genocide. That's wholly different to dealing with individual terror groups. Surely you agree with that?
Yeah, there was a vote on that in the United Nations. In fact, the majority, when the vote came back, the majority actually supported the Chinese and what they're doing. They said there's nothing to see here. There's several delegations being there. But let me just make this point, please. And let's say I don't agree with the way the treatment to the Chinese of the Uyghurs. And that's how they've dealt with them. They put them in these education camps and say, we're going to train you, we're going to give you a job. If you don't get a job, then you're coming back. Now, let's have a look at how we dealt with Islamic terrorism. We went in an illegal war and we killed over 250,000 people. Now, which...
Oh, listen, but let's be very clear, Mike. Two wrongs don't make a right. That is for sure. But thank you for your thoughts on China and the Chinese Communist Party regime. We've got another caller who wants to talk about the NHS and my thoughts about NHS capacity from West Sussex. Sarah, a very good afternoon to you.
Oh, good afternoon, Richard. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. What are your thoughts on the NHS? Is that about the capacity or other issues?
Right, I just wanted to interject first of all in respect of the amount of our public utilities which are foreign owned. It's probably worth mentioning EU procurement regulations, which required any public contract to be tendered across all of the other EU member states.
Yeah, no, it's a good point there, Sarah. But this was actually about originally it was the government that sold off the utilities. So it wasn't contracts placed. It was actually just the the sale of the shares in the respective
Yeah.
businesses, which I think is different.
Yeah, okay. But the other issue around that was around reducing the control that trade unions had. And now I'll launch straight into the trade unions and the NHS, which is really the purpose for my call.
Go for it.
Yeah, great, thank you. You spoke about the Nightingale hospitals and the fact that they weren't able to operate because they hadn't got sufficient staff. That became one of those myths, if you like, that was put out because it links in nicely to the NHS is understaffed, the NHS is underfunded, all of those sorts of claims that are made, which are not necessarily, they don't necessarily have any particular substance. But actually, the Nightingale hospitals themselves are part of civil defence plans, but they were brought about by Professor Ferguson and his modelling because he predicted how many deaths and the throughput of patients and this sort of thing. That was why the extra capacity was actually needed. But
we were clearly told
Yeah.
by the by numerous people that ultimately it was the failure to organise the staff behind the creation. To back up the creation of the hospitals that really led them not to be used and then essentially to be very quickly completely mothballed.
Right, I wouldn't necessarily hold with that particular viewpoint because if we actually roll forward, how many patients are now sitting on waiting lists for elective surgery and treatments that haven't been carried out?
Many millions. I mean, it's
Exactly.
hard to know whether it's 5 million or there's talk about 11 million or 13 million. But that's my whole point, is that we can't run the risk of essentially the capacity in the existing NHS bed capacity, being taken up with whether it's COVID cases or a serious flu epidemic. That then means that actually you'd have to start cancelling the operations, the diagnostics of the non-COVID patients. And I think we're not far from that, from what I'm hearing at the moment.
The problem is one can actually set one's clock by the annual NHS crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I referred to that.
Which the BBC helped to advance, and they stopped filming from the empty A&E waiting rooms because obviously their reporting and what the film showed weren't one and the same. So then they moved outside of hospitals where there were no sirens blaring, there were no queues of ambulances. So anyway, let's leave that to one side.
Sarah, I thank you very much for those thoughts. I've got to go to David in Bristol before we get to the bottom of the hour. But that was a quick discussion, catch up on the NHS capacity. David, in Bristol, what are your thoughts? You've just got over COVID, I gather.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we've had it in the family here, and we've all just fortunately been released out into the big wide world again. But it was just something when I was listening to your programme earlier on about the need for passports. I mean, we've put the NHS app onto our phones because we're intending to go abroad at the end of October for a few days. So we wanted to make certain that we could sort of generate all the QR codes, etc. But while we were actually, we looked on our phones while we were in, while we were sort of in our 10 days quarantine, and we suddenly found all the COVID information had actually been removed off it.
Really?
We sort of rang 119 and they sort of said, well, yeah, it'll sort of come back. Now, my information actually this morning has come back on, but my wife's has not. So if we were required to show one of these QR codes to get in somewhere, and let's say we were going to football this afternoon, for instance, if it wasn't an international weekend, I could go, but my wife couldn't.
So your concern is about the, in a sense, the accuracy of the data, the quality of the technology behind the quest for vaccine passports. Is that right?
Well, that's right, and also the ability to be able to switch that information off.
Well, I mean,
whenever they want to.
David, thank you. I think it's fair to say that NHS and IT systems and accuracy and quality has always been a huge question, and over the years, billions have been wasted. Well, we've had some calls there, some people's thoughts. We've had a discussion about the Extinction Rebellion protests in London. As we move towards the last half hour, time's flying, we're going to be talking about the consequences and the ongoing situation in and around Afghanistan to find out what's the state of the humanitarian crisis and what role China are beginning to play. It's 12:30. This is Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Here are your headlines. I'm Chloe Culpen. Prince Charles's former aide steps down from a royal charity accused of helping a Saudi businessman receive an honour. And the PM is under pressure over social care funding as its reported plans could be revealed this week. A former aide to Prince Charles has stepped down from a royal charity following claims he offered to help secure an honour for a rich Saudi donor. Michael Fawcett, a former valet to the Prince, has temporarily left his job as chief executive of the Prince's Foundation. The Sunday Times reports he coordinated support for a CBE to be given to the businessman in 2016 after royal charities received £1.5 million from him. The Prince's Foundation says Mr Fawcett supports its investigation. Plans to overhaul England's social care system could be unveiled as early as this week, following government talks over the weekend. The current system is under pressure, with past administrations failing to properly fund or reform it. It's reported the Prime Minister is facing pressure from his own MPs not to increase national insurance to pay for it. Parental consent will be required if 12 to 15-year-olds are offered a COVID jab. However, Vaccine Minister Nadeem Zahawi has told Times Radio that children will be able to override their parents' refusal for them to have the jab if they are deemed competent to make the decision. He says a final decision has not yet been made on whether to offer healthy youngsters a vaccine. A surfer has died after being attacked by a shark off the east coast of Australia. The man was believed to be in his late 20s and was bitten in the arm as he surfed near the Emerald Beach. The Paralympics closing ceremony has begun with gold medalist David Smith carrying the flag for Team GB, who bagged 2 more bronze medals on the final day in the basketball and the badminton. That's your news on Talk Radio TV. More in half an hour.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the last half hour of Tice Talk on Talk Radio. And we need to obviously think and understand what's going on now. What does the future hold for Afghanistan and the humanitarian crisis and all the implications of that? And I'm delighted we've got a couple of great guests in this last half hour. Firstly, we've got Doug Beattie, is the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party and also a member of the Northern Ireland Assembly. Very good afternoon to you, Doug. Thanks for joining us. So what's your understanding of the latest situation on the ground? There's a couple of key things I want to focus on. There's obviously the ongoing sort of resistance from some of the Afghan fighters who are essentially against the Taliban, led by, I think, Ahmad Massoud in the Panjshir Valley. Have you any latest information as to what's the status there? There's conflicting reports in various bits of the media over the weekend.
Well, it's my understanding, Richard, that they are still holding the Panjshir Valley. There has been an awful influx of fighters from around the country who were ex-Afghan commandos and alikes. Many displaced people have now headed towards the Panjshir Valley and are taking refuge here. There is a degree of a humanitarian crisis at a local level taking place within the Panjshir Valley because of lack of food, electricity, and shelter. I believe that the Taliban forces are at the mouth of the valley and the surrounding hillsides, and that skirmishes are taking place, and I think they will continue for a long time. There is a real danger that the Panjshir Valley could fall to the Taliban, and again, what we would see is exactly what we're seeing throughout the rest of the country, and that is a revenge being enacted, which would just be horrendous.
And I mean, that does sound horrendous, and that brings me on to what are you hearing about the way across the country that the Taliban are behaving? We've had all the sort of the PR spin, but in reality, on the ground, what are you hearing about what's going on?
Well, what I'm hearing is pretty much what I expected to hear. The Taliban do not control the whole of Afghanistan. They may have the capitals, both Kabul and Kandahar. They may have provincial governors in place, but the whole of Afghanistan is controlled by a myriad of militias and drugs lords and other groupings who are doing their own thing without laws, without governance. And those who help the government are being disappeared. Women are being disappeared as well. They're being kidnapped, and people are being murdered as we speak. The problem that we've got, Richard, is we're all focused on Kabul, and we have all been focused pretty much on Kabul, and now we're directing ourselves towards the Panjshir Valley. But the real issue is in the Calais, the towns, the provincial capitals, where the cameras aren't, in the countryside. That's where the issue is. That's where it's taking place now. That's where the revenge is taking place, and that's where women and young girls are going to be suffering the most.
I mean, these stories just sound absolutely horrendous. This is the consequences of, in a sense, the decisions that the US President Joe Biden took. And just finally, Doug, so do you think that we should actually be in some way offering support or provisions to the resistance in the Panjshir Valley to help avoid yet another humanitarian crisis there?
We should be offering the widest support we possibly can. It was a strategic failure of the West and the coalition forces to leave Afghanistan the manner we did. But there are now something in the region of 5 million displaced people in the whole of Afghanistan. We need to do something to bring aid to those people and support. For those who have sought refuge in the Panjshir Valley, who fear for their lives, and they are right to fear for their lives. The Taliban are brutal. Then we must be supporting them in any way we possibly can, be that with equipment or be that with medicines or be that with any other aid that we can possibly do. We should be supporting these people. Without a doubt we should. That they are trying to hold up a degree of democracy in that part of Afghanistan, and we cannot just abandon them like we've abandoned the rest of the country.
Doug Beattie, thank you so much for those thoughts on what's going on in the Panjshir Valley. Doug Beattie there, the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party and a member of the Northern Ireland Assembly. Thank you very much. It's 12:38. This is Tice Talk on, of course, Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio. Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk on Talk Radio. It's 12:42. There's still time for a call or two before the top of the hour. 0344 499 1000. But I'm delighted now to be joined by Colonel James Sunderland, MP for Bracknell, who served 27 years in the military before becoming an MP in 2019, about the ongoing situation, what needs to be done, and whether or not our own departments are, in a sense, doing everything that can be done. A very good afternoon to you, James. Thank you for joining me. What I'm really keen to know, I'm not sort of interested in, you know, the various sort of briefing wars going on between various ministers and departments. What I'm interested to know is are we doing, what's going on with the Foreign Office? Are they doing the absolute maximum to ensure that those who sadly were left behind when the first evacuation, when it finished, what's going on with movement of people across land borders? I read in the press this morning about WhatsApp groups, trying to organise things. What are you hearing? What's your understanding? You may well be involved in some of them.
Well, good afternoon, Richard, and thank you for having me on. Like you, I don't want to pour any fuel on the flames of what might be an emerging or an extant cabinet spat. But I'm pretty convinced, from what I know as a backbencher, that both the Foreign Office and the MOD are doing what they can still for British nationals left in Afghanistan. There are efforts underway. Several of my colleagues are involved with them to get people evacuated by land. And I've no doubt at all that the Foreign Office are working very hard with our partners in the region and the neighbouring countries of Afghanistan to ensure that safe passage is happening.
But what does that actually mean in terms of what leverage have we got? Obviously, you had the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab in Pakistan, and talking a good game, which he's very capable of doing. But in terms of reality on the ground, are you satisfied that there's enough going on, and that we really, what's actually going on? What are we doing?
Well, as a military man, I tend to play with a straight bat. So I'll tell you what I know. I think there are lots of sound bites coming out of the Foreign Office at the moment. They are very positive. Dominic Raab has been out to the region. He's meeting with partners and diplomats and stakeholders all of the time. So I'm pretty happy that the Foreign Office is doing what it can. But let's be honest, we've got no boots on the ground there now. The evacuation operation has happened. Therefore, our influence within Afghanistan is limited. And therefore, in my view, we have to take the opportunity now of talking to the Taliban as best we can to make sure that British interests are best served.
And in a sense, that's it, isn't it? However difficult, and for anybody in the military, whether you served in Afghanistan or not, it must feel so difficult engaging with the Taliban. But that is the reality, isn't it? Now that they have to be engaged with. We don't have to recognise them, but they have to be engaged with in order to get. You've got humanitarian aid. You've got the airport potentially being reopened. I understand imminently. How comfortable are you about the level of engagement that is going on with the Taliban, and what level of trust can or cannot be applied in those discussions and negotiations?
Well, I'm not comfortable at all personally engaging with the Taliban, but I'm also a pragmatist, and we have no choice. If you were to talk to any veteran that served out there, 20 years of a difficult, dangerous attritional land campaign, the Taliban was our enemy, and the Taliban is responsible for killing 457 British men and women, and many more Americans, and many more coalition forces. So we don't like the idea of engaging with them. But in order to have a footprint in Kabul and the wider Afghanistan now, in order to have a bed from which we can effect British policy interests across Afghanistan, we have no choice. There's a vacuum there. It's pretty chaotic. But in my view, chaos has an advantage in the sense that you can actually lay out your stall on what you want and make it happen.
Okay, and I was just talking earlier with Doug Beattie about what may be going on in the Panjshir Valley, where it appears there's still fighting going on. between the resistance to the Taliban and a potential humanitarian crisis. Do you think it's possible that NATO allies, possibly in conjunction with Pakistan, may actually be able to provide some form of assistance there to try and reduce yet another serious humanitarian crisis over and above what we've seen already?
Well, Richard, anything's possible, but it depends upon what the Foreign Office wants to do. So who are these people? Are they a potential enemy? Are they a potential ally? Is the Taliban currently the enemy, or are they now forming a government that we have to negotiate with? So it's not easy to take sides. What we have to do basically is to meet with the Taliban, set out our stall. The UN resolutions passed recently are a good way to go. Dominic Raab has been very credible with what he set out in the media over the last few days. So let's make sure with the Taliban's help, Afghanistan has not again become a hotbed for terrorism. Let's ensure safe passage to British nationals and entitled personnel out of Afghanistan. Let's make sure that we're looking after human rights, women's rights, children's rights, rights of homosexuals. Let's make sure that Afghanistan, once again, is what we want it to be. Let's not turn the clock back over 20 years, and let's make sure that we work with the Taliban so that they are at the table and not a rogue state.
And do you think that that may involve releasing some of the frozen financial assets? Because we're reading, and you can understand that essentially it's hard enough running a government, particularly in a state in a country like Afghanistan, but with no money, chaos will ensue very, very quickly. Is that some of the leverage that we've got, or actually is the sort of the increasing relationship between China and the Taliban, meaning that actually they will that China will lend them money and in a sense override that leverage that we may have?
Well, let's be frank, the Taliban doesn't owe us anything at all in the West. So for us to influence the Taliban, we may need to do some deals with them. Politics is a messy, dirty business. Internationally, it's probably even worse. And therefore, for us to influence them is going to require a cost to us. But we have no choice. If we are serious about Afghanistan remaining relatively democratic, if we're serious about human rights, if we're serious about British interests in Afghanistan, if we do not want Afghanistan to be carved up by the Russians and the Chinese, we may have no choice to meet with the Taliban and offer some incentives.
I'm not sure I can see Afghanistan being relatively democratic, but I am deeply concerned about the potential influence that China may have in what is clearly a geopolitically very important area. And of course, Afghanistan, as we know, has huge deposits of rare earth metals. It's been called the Saudi Arabia of lithium. And in my view, we shouldn't be allowing China essentially to have a free ride to come in and extract those metals. Do you think we've got an ability to engage with the Taliban, however tough and impossible that feels and sounds, to do that, or do you think it's too late?
No, I think now is the time. In fact, now is the opportunity. And as the phoenix rises from the ashes, I think we've got to grab the phoenix and make it happen. The Chinese and the Russians are there now in Kabul. They have diplomatic missions there. They've got embassies there. They're talking to the Taliban. We haven't. We're missing a trick. Yes, I know it's dangerous. Yes, I know there's a threat to British personnel. I know there's no military footprint there, but we have no choice, in my view, but to get ourselves back in there very, very quickly and to get talking to the Taliban, whether we like it or not.
And do you think that that political will exists in the Foreign Office and the Foreign Secretary?
I think it does. I mean, the beauty of where we are right now, of course, is that the Foreign Office can do what it wants. The Foreign Office needs to sit down and work out a plan. What does the Foreign Office want from Afghanistan? What does it seek from the Taliban? What are our strategic aims in Afghanistan? What is it the UK wants? And by going ugly early with this, in my view, we can sit down with the Taliban, explain what it is we're after, do the necessary deals, as unpalatable as it might be, and make this happen. But if we don't do it now, we'll miss a trick. And we'll be watching all the lithium coming out and ending up in Moscow and Beijing.
That's my real concern as to as to the risks here, and it is enormous, but it is so difficult, and I fear that there isn't that that political ambition within the Foreign Office. But Colonel James Sunderland, MP for Bracknell, thank you so much for those thoughts. This will be an ongoing issue. we watch closely with what may be happening in the Panjshir Valley. Thank you very much indeed for that, James Sunderland. Well, we're approaching the end of the show. It's been a very, very busy morning. And my goodness me, the whole issue about vaccinating children really did get people going. And I just want to replay this clip. It's one of my favourites, actually, listening to the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
I would just urge all families thinking about this across the country to listen to the JCVI. They are extremely expert. They're amongst the best, if not the best, in the world. They know what's safe, and I think we should listen to them and take our lead from them.
In the lifetime of the Scottish Parliament, a government has never departed from the recommendations of the JCVI on questions of vaccination and immunisation. So if at any point I, as First Minister of the Scottish Government, generally was to do that, that would be a significant step.
The Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation will look at this because vaccines need to be safe for children. I think the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation have to consider all these things. Right. I will absolutely follow their recommendation.
So there we are. The vaccine minister says that he will follow their recommendation. Well, we will see what happens in the week ahead, because now the pressure seems to have moved from the JCVI to Professor Chris Whitty, and my goodness me, he has got a lot of responsibility on his shoulders. Not an easy one. We were also talking about Nightingale hospitals, the capacity in the NHS, some real concerns there. But I just feel that this issue is going to dominate the news over the coming week about vaccinating children. I really do feel that the government has got to try and heal the process. We had an interesting comments from some of the people involved in the debate about whether or not how we get to a middle way, how we reduce the division, the risk of division, the serious risk of rising anger amongst those parents who do not want their children to be vaccinated, but recognising there are, of course, millions of parents who do want to vaccinate children. And so I think actually where we got to was that there's no rush for this decision. We need more data, but absolutely there should be no form of moral coercion or bullying of people to vaccinate their children, because that, I just think, will be so divisive, so difficult. Anyway, that's going to be the big thing in the week ahead. Thank you for your calls, your tweets, your texts. We are, of course, now approaching the top of the hour, and that means that you have to look forward to the joys and the delights of one Bob Mills, who has just entered the studio. Good
Mr.
afternoon
Tice,
to
you're
you,
getting
Bob.
there now, and you're top of the hour. You're getting all the phrases.
All the lingo's coming.
What you'll be doing next is, we're fast approaching the big hour of 1am. That's my favourite. And you'll be listening to a soundtrack of your life. I love them DJs.
Them DJs. That may take some time. So you're in danger of bringing some sun.
Oh, it's amazing. I've come in with a sweater on, and again, it's 95 degrees out there. People are melting.
Not before time. So what's going on? What have you got for our
Do you know
listeners?
Musa Okwonga? He's a very interesting man. He's a poet. He was a black boy who went to Eton. Very interesting man. He's written a book with Ian Wright, the footballer.
Yeah.
So we've got him. After that, it's just round. Paul Zerding's on, the brilliant ventriloquist. A couple of people who are in a show at the West End, and ending with live music. It is what it is.
Ongoing, never ending.
No controversy.
No controversy. Well, we've had a bit of controversy this morning because we had to talk about the issue of vaccinating children. We had to talk about vaccine passports because it looks as though the government, they've been flip-flopping all over the place. I lose track of it, but it looks as though they are trying to bring them back in on things like nightclubs and beyond. So yeah, I think I'm afraid, Bob, in the world of politics, there is no shortage of controversy and no shortage of challenges ahead. But you may have listened to my clip about the Prime Minister saying, well, the JCVI, they are the best in the world, and so we should listen to them. Who knows? Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the show. You've been listening to Richard Tice on my show, Tice Talk. We've got coming up, of course, Bob Mills, the regular, the